The first thing I remembered about the stone keep was the silence. It wasn't an empty silence, but a heavy, watchful one, the kind that falls when a room holds its breath. It was a silence that had weight and texture, woven from centuries of granite, duty, and the long, cold memory of snow. 3 winters I had been away, and the fortress had not changed. It still tasted of iron and frost on the back of my tongue, and smelled of wood smoke so old it had become a part of the stone itself. The wind was still a thief here, snatching warmth from your skin and whispers from your lips. My own lands, the Winterwood, were different. There, the silence was alive, filled with the soft creak of pine boughs and the distant call of a hunting owl. It smelled of damp earth and wild herbs, of life stubborn enough to thrive in the cold. I had built that life from nothing, from the dirt under my nails and the defiance in my bones. I was Lady Elara of the Winterwood now, a name I had earned, not inherited. But as my horse passed under the great snarling portcullis of the stone keep, a ghost of the girl I used to be shivered inside my fine wool cloak. She was small and smelled of the kennels, with hands chapped from lye soap and a heart calloused by being unseen. I saw him on the steps of the inner bailey, waiting. Lord Valerius. He was exactly as my memory had held him, still as cut stone, his face a closed ledger. His silver-shot black hair was stirred by the same thieving wind, but he did not seem to feel it. The cold was his element, his armor. He was beautiful, I had always thought, but in the way a glacier is beautiful, a vast and unforgiving power, frozen in place. For 3 years I had practiced this moment in my head, imagined 1,000 clever, cutting things to say. I had imagined sweeping past him with the cool indifference of a queen. Instead, our eyes met across the courtyard, and the breath I was holding turned to frost in my lungs. His expression did not change, but I saw something flicker in the gray depths of his eyes. A recognition. Not of the lady of the Winterwood, but of the kennel girl who had left without a word in the dead of night. The silence of the keep deepened, listening. Beside him stood Lady Seraphina, her beauty as sharp and cold as a shard of ice. Her lips, the color of blood on snow, thinned as she looked at me. She remembered me, too. Lady Elara, Valerius said. His voice was just as I recalled, like a blade drawn slowly across some stone. It had a formal, mechanical hitch, as if the words had to be dragged past some great internal resistance. "Welcome to the Stone Keep." "Lord Valerius," I replied, my own voice steadier than I felt. I dismounted, handing my reins to a waiting groom, my movements deliberate. I would not let them see the tremor in my hands. The summons was urgent. "I trust the threat to our borders is not as grim as your message suggested." Seraphina glided forward, a rustle of expensive silk in the listening quiet. Her scent was of winter roses, a cloying, artificial sweetness that fought with the honest cold. "How quaint," she murmured, her eyes sweeping over my practical leather tunic and fur-lined cloak. "The little stray returns and fancies herself a wolf." She leaned closer, her voice a venomous whisper meant only for me, but the wind carried it. "You still smell of the kennels." The ghost of the kennel girl flinched, but the lady of the Winterwood smiled. It was a small, dry thing, the only kind of smile I had ever truly mastered. "And you, Lady Seraphina, still smell of desperation. Some things, it seems, never change." I did not wait for a reply, simply inclined my head to Valerius and walked past them into the keep, the great doors groaning shut behind me. The fortress exhaled, its breath a cold draft down the corridor. I had forgotten how much effort it took just to breathe in this place. That night, sleep was a shallow, restless sea. I kept drifting back to another time, another life. Back to the damp straw and the honest, musky scent of the hounds. I had been content there, in my own way. My world was small, bounded by the kennels, the kitchens, and the mews. I was invisible, a cog in the great grinding machine of the keep, and my invisibility was my freedom. My only luxury was my own thoughts, the dry internal commentary on the absurdities of the highborn. I saw them as they were, stripped of their finery, just men and women, brittle with pride and riddled with petty fears. The disruption had come, as all disruptions did, in the form of a man with a parchment scroll and a self-important voice. He'd read the decree in the main hall during the evening meal. To secure the Northern Alliance against the encroaching Blight, Lord Valerius would take a wife before the first snows fell. The choice was a foregone conclusion. Lady Seraphina of the House of Vale was the only suitable match, a union of wealth and military might. It was a cold, practical piece of statecraft, a life bartered for a treaty. I was mucking out the whelping pens when I heard the news, and I'd actually laughed. Not a loud laugh, just a short, sharp bark of it that startled a nearby hound. It was the sheer, ridiculous tragedy of it all. To be the lord of the stone keep, a man whose power could shake the mountains, and to have your heart be the one thing you weren't allowed to command. Kale, the captain of the guard, and one of the few who ever spoke to me as if I were a person, had been passing by. He'd paused, a rare, genuine smile cracking his stern face. "Find something amusing, kennel girl?" "Just thinking it's a high price to pay for a treaty," I'd muttered, not looking up from my work. "He looks like he's arranging his own funeral." Kyle's smile had widened. He didn't reply, but he'd seen me then. He was perhaps the first one who ever really did. But there had been another who saw me. Not a man. Not exactly. It began a month before the decree. I was banking the fire in my small room near the kennels when a shadow fell across the door. It was him. The wolf, Lord Valerius's other half, the secret the entire keep pretended not to know. He was enormous, a creature of moonlight and silver fur, with eyes the color of a winter sky. He stood there, silent, just watching me. I was not afraid. The hounds I tended were half-wolf themselves. I knew their language of silence, of posture. This was not a posture of aggression. It was one of curiosity. He started leaving me gifts. Strange, sincere, and utterly baffling offerings. The first was a single, perfect hawk feather laid carefully on my doorstep. Then a river stone, worn smooth and gray, shaped almost like a heart. He never came when I was looking. The gifts would just appear, tokens from a world I did not know. I kept them in a small wooden box under my cot, a private collection of secrets. The strangest part was Valerius. The morning after a gift appeared, he would invariably find a reason to come to the kennels. He would inspect a hound's paw with excruciating focus, or question me about the feed stores in that halting, mechanical voice of his. He never sanctioned the wolf, never acknowledged the gifts. But his eyes would dart to my hands, my face as if searching for a reaction. It was a conversation we were having in a language with no words, a shared secret that hung in the air between the lord of the keep and the kennel girl. Once the wolf stole a crimson silk ribbon from Lady Seraphina's chambers. He left it on my pillow. The ensuing uproar was magnificent. Seraphina had shrieked about thieves and insolent staff until she was hoarse. Valerius had appeared at my door that evening, his face a mask of profound mortification. He looked like a man explaining a sock to an ambassador. There was a report of a missing item, he'd stammered, his gaze fixed on a point just over my shoulder. I had simply reached behind me, picked up the ribbon, and held it out to him. This, my lord. The look of sheer, unadulterated helplessness that washed over his face was something I would never forget. He took the ribbon as if it were a hot coal, his fingers brushing mine for a fraction of a second. A jolt, like lightning on a frozen plain, shot up my arm. His hand was not cold, as I'd always imagined. It was searingly warm. He'd muttered something that might have been an apology and fled, leaving me with the ghost of his touch and the certainty that the man and the wolf were more deeply entangled than anyone knew. The wolf was his heart, his instinct, and it had, for some inexplicable reason, chosen me. The night of the betrothal feast was a blur of noise and color that I watched from the shadows of the gallery. I saw Valerius stand, his face carved from ice, and take Seraphina's hand. He spoke the words of binding, his voice steady, a perfect performance of a lord's duty. And in that moment, the silent conversation I'd been having with the wolf ended. He wasn't there. For the first time in weeks, I could not feel his presence lurking at the edges of the keep, a watchful silver shadow. It was as if the man, in choosing his duty, had finally managed to cage the beast, or kill it. That thought was a physical pain, a cold blade twisting in my gut. He had chosen her. He had chosen the alliance, the power, the cold, sensible match. He had chosen to be the frozen king. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that if I stayed, the invisible girl would wither and die in this suffocating silence. The wolf had seen something in me. It was time I saw it in myself. I packed my small box of treasures, a feather, a stone, the memory of a warm hand, and I walked out of the stone keep that night, not looking back. I did not feel cast out. I felt as though I had just orchestrated my own escape. Now, 3 years later, in the suffocating grandeur of the keep's war room, that escape felt like a temporary reprieve. The threat was real. Festering creatures from the blighted lands were probing our borders, Valerius's and mine. Our territories abutted, a long, contentious line that was now our shared front line. We were forced allies, forced neighbors, forced to sit across a heavy oak table and pretend the past 3 years and the months before them had never happened. Seraphina sat at Valerius's right hand, a constant, pointed reminder of his choice. She contributed nothing to the council, but her sharp gaze missed nothing, cataloging every glance, every word that passed between us. Valerius, for his part, was a study in control. He guided the meeting with a cold, precise intelligence, but I could see the tension in the set of his jaw, the way his hands rested, too still, on the table before him. He was a man holding a wolf on a very short leash. My own commanders gave their reports, their voices clear and confident. They were loyal, hardened by the wilds of the Winterwood, and they looked at me with the respect I had earned. I could feel Seraphina's contempt like a physical force. To her, I was an upstart, an anomaly that needed to be corrected. The Blight Reavers are using the old smuggling tunnels through the Dragon's Tooth Pass, I stated, pointing to a spot on the large map spread across the table. They are bypassing your main garrisons. My scouts confirmed it 2 days ago. We need to collapse the tunnels or set an ambush at the source. The kennel girl presumes to teach us strategy? Seraphina's laugh was like the tinkle of breaking glass. Her scouts are likely just poachers and vagabonds. We should trust the reports from our seasoned commanders. A tense silence fell over the room. The other lords shifted uncomfortably, their eyes on Valerius. This was her move, a public challenge to my authority, an attempt to put me back in my place. I held my breath, waiting. The old Valerius would have ignored the comment, moving on with cold pragmatism, leaving me to fend for myself. But it was not the old Valerius who answered. He did not raise his voice. He did not even look at Seraphina. His gray eyes were fixed on the map, but his words were aimed at her. Lady Elara's scouts have proven reliable. Her counsel is valued here. The vagabonds of the Winterwood seem to see more clearly than the seasoned commanders of the Stone Keep. We will investigate the tunnels. The vindication was a sudden, dizzying warmth in my chest. It was a subtle defense, but in the rigid formality of this court, it was a thunderclap. He had not just defended me. He had elevated my word over that of his own people, and in front of everyone. I risked a glance at him, and for a heartbeat, his eyes met mine. The wolf was there, just behind the surface, watchful and possessive. Seraphina's face was a mask of fury, her knuckles white where she gripped the arm of her chair. The battle lines had just been redrawn. We spent the next few days in forced proximity, poring over maps in the cavernous library. The silence here was different, softer. It smelled of old parchment and beeswax, a scent I had always loved. The books held their breath around us, silent witnesses. In these moments, away from the prying eyes of the court, the layers of Lord and Lady began to peel away. We were just two people trying to solve a problem. He began to thaw, in increments so small I thought I might be imagining them. A flicker of dry humor in response to one of my cynical observations. An unguarded moment of weariness when he rubbed the bridge of his nose, the Lord of the Keep momentarily vanishing, replaced by a tired man. He started observing me, not just my strategies, but me. He'd watch as I traced a line on a map, a strange intensity in his gaze. One night, we were working late, the only light coming from a single candelabra that threw our shadows up like giants against the shelves. The air was thick with unspoken words. "You have done well with the Winterwood," he said, his voice quiet, losing some of its mechanical edge. It was wild land, untamed. "It is still wild," I replied, not looking up from the map. "I didn't tame it. I listened to it." "I should have listened," he murmured, so softly I almost didn't hear it. I didn't know if he was talking about the land or something else entirely. I didn't ask. I was afraid of the answer. The small warmth that had begun to grow between us was a threat Seraphina could not ignore. She was a creature of politics and power. She knew an enemy when she saw one. She couldn't attack my position. Valerius had made that clear. So she decided to remove me from the board entirely. It happened during a formal dinner meant to solidify our new, tense alliance. A servant, his face pale with fear, offered me a goblet of deep red wine. I was about to take it when a scent, faint but sharp, cut through the aroma of the wine. Aconite, wolfsbane. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. I knew its smell well. We used it in the Winterwood to make poison-tipped arrows for hunting the great northern bears. It was a poison that burned from the inside out. My hand froze. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. I could feel every eye in the hall on me. To refuse the wine would be an insult. To drink it would be death. I looked up, and my eyes found Seraphina's across the hall. There was a smug, triumphant glitter in her gaze. She thought she had me trapped, but the girl who had survived by being unseen had learned to notice things others missed. The servant's trembling hand, the way his eyes darted towards Seraphina, the tiny, almost invisible sheen of oil on the surface of the wine. And the Lady of the Winterwood was not a girl who backed down from a fight. I stood up, the legs of my chair scraping against the stone floor. The sound was unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. I took the goblet from the servant's hand, but instead of drinking, I turned and walked directly towards the high table, towards the war council that was still formally in session. I walked until I stood before Lord Valerius. "My lord," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even me. "There is a traitor in this hall." I placed the goblet on the table in front of him. The silence was absolute. Every lord, every courtier, every servant was frozen. Valerius stared at the goblet, then at my face. His own was pale, his control stretched to its breaking point. "What is the meaning of this, Lady Elara?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "This wine is poisoned," I said simply, "with wolfsbane." A collective gasp went through the hall, but it was the reaction from Valerius that silenced everything else. The last vestiges of the frozen king shattered. A darkness flooded his eyes, a primal fury that was terrifying to behold. The air around him seemed to crackle with contained power. He rose slowly to his feet, and for the first time I saw the wolf wearing the man's skin, and it was looking at me not with curiosity, but with a terrifying absolute protectiveness. He moved without thinking, placing himself slightly in front of me, a living shield between me and the court. The bond, the secret we had never spoken of, was now a roaring fire in the center of the room, and its light was inescapable. "Who?" The word was not spoken. It was ripped from his throat, a sound that was half man, half beast. All eyes turned to Seraphina. She had gone deathly pale, her composure finally cracking. This was not how it was supposed to go. I was supposed to drink the wine and die quietly in a corner, a regrettable accident. I was not supposed to bring the evidence to the high table and unleash the wolf. "A formal inquiry will be held at dawn," Valerius declared, his voice shaking with a rage he could barely suppress. He gestured to Kael. "Take the servant into custody. Lady Elara will remain under my personal protection." He looked at me then, and the world narrowed to the space between us. The fury in his eyes was for the threat against me, but beneath it, there was something else. A raw, unguarded anguish. The look of a man who had almost lost something he hadn't even realized he possessed. The tribunal was a grim affair. The great hall was packed, the air thick with fear and anticipation. I stood before the council, calm and composed. I did not need to shout or weep. The truth was my only weapon, and I wielded it with precision. I recounted the incident, described the scent of the poison, and pointed to the terrified servant, who confessed everything, naming Lady Seraphina as the one who had forced him, threatening his family if he refused. Seraphina, however, was a cornered viper. She spat denials, her voice rising in pitch. She spun a web of lies, accusing me of staging the whole affair to gain power, to usurp her position. She played on the court's prejudices, her words dripping with scorn. "You would believe this nobody?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This kennel girl who fled in the night like a common thief? She is nothing, a stray bitch who should have been put down years ago. He was meant for me. The power, the alliance, It was all meant for me. Her own words condemned her. The raw, naked ambition, the casual cruelty, it was all laid bare for the council to see. Her mask of high-born grace had been burned away by her rage, revealing the ugly truth beneath. A horrified silence descended. She had, in her fury, admitted everything. Valerius rose. He looked at the woman he had been bound to, not with anger, but with a profound and weary disappointment. "Lady Seraphina of the House of Vale," he said, his voice cold and clear as a winter morning. "Your alliance is poison. Your honor is a lie. By the old laws and the new, you are found guilty of treason and attempted murder against an honored ally of this keep. You are stripped of your titles and exiled from these lands. You will leave by sunset. If you are found within our borders after that, you will be hunted as the viper you are." He did not spare her another glance. His attention, the attention of the entire hall, turned to me. He walked down from the dais, his movements fluid and certain. The mechanical stiffness was gone, replaced by a deep, resonant purpose. He strode to the evidence table, picked up the poisoned goblet, and emptied its contents into a nearby brazier, where it hissed and flared with a sickly green light. Then, he took a decanter of clean wine, poured a fresh cup, and walked to me. He stopped before me, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from him. The entire world held its breath. I expected him to offer the cup, a gesture of apology. He did not. Instead, he raised it to his own lips and took a sip, his eyes never leaving mine. A public declaration of trust. Only then did he extend the goblet to me. I took it, my fingers brushing his. That same jolt, that impossible heat. But this time it was not a surprise. It was a homecoming. He spoke, and his voice, for the first time, was entirely his own. Not the Lord's, not the wolf's, his. And it was filled with a regret so profound, it reshaped the very air in the hall. "The stone keep has been cold for too long," he said, his words for me, but loud enough for all to hear. "It requires a heart. I was a fool to let the only one it had ever found walk away." He did not kneel. He did not offer a crown. He simply stood there, seeing me, finally and completely, and in front of everyone, he allowed himself to be seen. It was more than I had ever dared to dream of. Weeks later, the keep was settling into a new rhythm. Seraphina was a bitter memory, and the alliance with the Winterwood was being forged anew, built on mutual respect, not a loveless contract. I found myself in the library often, the scent of old parchment a comforting balm. It had become our space, a quiet haven away from the duties that still consumed our days. He came to me one evening, as I was tracing the faded constellations on an old celestial map. He was silent for a long moment, simply watching me. When I turned, I saw he was holding something in his hand. He opened his palm. Lying there was a single, perfect hawk feather. My breath caught in my throat. "I believe this is yours," he said softly. I looked from the feather to his face. "The wolf," I whispered. It was not a question. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "It is a part of me, an old curse on my bloodline. The instinct, the emotion, without the restraint of reason. For years I fought him, caged him. I thought it was my duty to be the stone, the ice to feel nothing." He took a step closer. "But he saw you. He was not bound by my titles, by my duties, by my damned, stupid pride. He saw what was true. He knew what I was too blind to see. He gently took my hand and placed the feather in my palm, his fingers closing over mine. His touch was warm and sure. He chose you from the beginning, Elara, and my greatest regret is that it took me 3 winters of unrelenting cold to finally listen to him. I curled my fingers around the feather, its softness a stark contrast to the calluses on my skin. I never understood, I admitted, my voice thick. The gifts, the ribbon. I thought I was going mad. A small, genuine smile touched his lips, transforming his severe face. I think I was the one going mad. Kyle found me trying to reason with him one night after he'd decided your firewood pile was structurally unsound, and proceeded to rearrange it. The wolf has very particular ideas about stacking logs. I laughed, a real unrestrained laugh, and the sound echoed in the quiet library. It felt like breaking a spell. He watched me, his expression full of a yearning so deep it made my own heart ache in response. The last wall between us crumbled into dust. We stood on the battlements later that night, looking out over the sleeping lands. For the first time, the wind that swept across the stone did not feel like a thief. It felt like a promise, carrying the scent of thawing earth from the valleys below. In the gardens of the keep, for so long barren and frozen, my people from the Winterwood had been working alongside the keep's gardeners. I could just make out, in the moonlight, the faint outline of new green shoots pushing their way through the cold soil. The thaw was real. It was happening inside the castle walls and inside its lord. Valerius stood beside me, our shoulders almost touching. The silence between us was no longer heavy or watchful. It was comfortable, a shared space where words were not always necessary. He had given me a keep, a title, a place at his side, but the greatest gift he had given me was the one the wolf had offered all along, the simple, profound, and astonishing gift of being truly seen. And as I stand here now, telling you this story by the warmth of my own fire, I find myself looking back on it all. It's a strange path, the one that led me from the kennels to the throne. Did you see it coming? That the quietest person in the room might have the most to say? What was the moment that hit you hardest? Tell me one thing in the comments below before you go. It's a comfort, sharing these tales. It makes the world feel a little smaller, a little warmer. Where are you listening from tonight? I imagine all of you out there, under different stars, but sharing in this single story, a community woven from words and whispers. If you'd like to keep your seat by the fire, make sure you subscribe. There are so many more stories waiting to be told. But for tonight, I'll leave you with this thought. Sometimes, the coldest winters are just making way for the most glorious spring.